Nobody told me, so, but honestly, you know, I mean, you're kind of in the same boat now, Rob, but I'm doing it, the only person I got to write the White House, I think rumor has it, the 250, 30 things figured out, so I got to base standards, so I'm right now, trying to do everything, you know? Yeah, it'll be fun. Like 2 months now, but I mean, they like, they did something where I feel like they were like,
Thank you all.
maybe those, anyway, trying to get, can't keep my head off.
It's a mutual feeling.
I'm trying hard.
Little Brooks next? I'm so sick of the same shit for 9 years. But it's like, yeah, that's just it's just took my hand there. We stopped at okay, like, have you ever been to the office? They're like a pension.
Thank you.
I know, right time for it. Literally something.
Long meeting. It was. Good though. Hey, good. How are you doing?
I'm just going to pass the microphone around for press to ask
Okay.
questions. So you guys are ready.
Okay.
Direction.
Toby
Just ran to the men's room. Francois was there and he just stepped out for just a second.
You had it back.
Yeah, you're going to be there. Yeah, Chad's going to be there.
Yeah.
We stayed. Oh, you did. Yeah. 8 days ago, Nashville. And my mother's family's Christmas party is in Raleigh, so I'm not going to be done until Sunday. Wow. I got to, I'm going to shut it down once I get done. I'm done. For the holidays. Toby was just in the, make sure he just was in the men's room.
There he is.
We coordinated on our Carolina blue ties.
Okay. Maybe shut that door so we. Thank you. Well, almost afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today, and the members of the press. Hopefully, you all have a place. I think we've got most of the seats up front here taken. But I want to welcome everyone today, and I am Alan Armstrong in my role as the NPC chair. I have been involved in the work of a lot of studies over the years, and certainly great to see the progress and the speed at which the NPC committees on both permitting and gas electric coordination got through these studies. And so at the outset, I'd like to give a brief reminder of the council's origins and operations. The National Petroleum Council is a federally chartered and privately funded advisory committee, which was originally established by the Secretary of the Interior in 1946 at the request of President Harry S. Truman. The NPC is currently chartered by the Secretary of Energy under the provisions of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA, of 1972. And the council membership of approximately 200 persons is selected and appointed by the Secretary of Energy. The purpose of the NPC is solely to advise, inform, and make recommendations to the Secretary of Energy with respect to any matter relating to oil and natural gas or to the oil and natural gas industries that is submitted to it by the Secretary. So in other words, we serve at the pleasure of the Secretary. Secretary provides us a request and we respond to that. The NPC does not concern itself with trade practices, nor does it engage in any of the usual trade association activities, and the council does not lobby. The purpose of the press conference today is to take questions from the media, and as you heard earlier today, Francois Poirier of TC Energy, here to my left, chaired the NPC Permitting Committee, and Jim Carr to my right of the Southern Companies, and Toby Rice of EQT Corporation were the chair and vice chair respectively of the Gas Electric Committee, or Gas Electric Coordination Study. So we are also joined by Alex. These are the people that really do a lot of the heavy lifting here. Alex Oler, who's chair of the permitting subcommittee, and Ken Jagelski, thank you, who is chair of the gas and electric subcommittee. And they did make the presentations, if you were able to see those this morning. The principal actions taken at the NPC meeting today were the council's approval of these committee study reports, and these, we believe, are really important and crucial at this time that our elected officials and actually beyond that, a lot of the recommendations go beyond just federal recommendations, but to state and RTOs and ISOs as well. And so we think these are really critical recommendations and critical that we get on with improving our permitting and improving the coordination between our gas and electric industry. So before taking your questions, I'd like to invite the committee leaders to make any additional comments if they have any, and then we'll go to your questions. So ladies and gentlemen, please keep in mind that we are here on National Petroleum Council business, so please confine your questions to that. And so we're not here representing our companies today, we're representing the NPC. And so I will turn it to any comments that study leaders have.
Thank you, Alan. As you noted, American energy demand is surging, and the projects we bring forward are designed to solve those challenges of rising demand and those challenges that created for customers. They address high costs, improve reliability, and helping America protect its national security and win the AI race. But the current permitting delays that prevent us from realizing those solutions in a timely manner. Even successful projects take far longer than they should. Recently, for example, at TC Energy, the company I lead, we pursued a relatively small project to increase capacity in a pipeline in the Pacific Northwest. More than half of that new capacity was from new software, yet it took us more than 2 years to obtain all of the permits. The critical point is this: the U.S. already has everything required to solve the problem: abundant resources, proven technology, and the private capital that is ready to deploy at scale. What it does not have is a permitting system that's capable of approving those projects in a reasonable time frame. The numbers tell the story plainly. U.S. natural gas demand has surged 56% since 2010, yet interstate pipeline capacity has grown by only 27%. Projects that are designed to satisfy every substantive environment requirement are delayed by process and by litigation, driving up costs for families, weakening reliability, and putting America's competitive edge at risk. That is exactly why this report is so urgent. This is not only an oil and gas issue. Many of the same processes delays are for other types of energy infrastructure like transmission lines and renewables. So our report delivers an actionable roadmap that would reduce timelines for needed infrastructure while maintaining environmental protection. The targeted recommendations include clarifying NEPA to focus reviews only on direct effects, enacting judicial reforms that would limit the use of the court system to block project development, focusing Clean Water Act reviews on water quality issues only, and expanding fast-track authorizations, categorical exclusions, and FERC blanket certificates for routine low-impact work. For the longer term, the report challenges lawmakers to develop a new permitting pathway for certain types of infrastructure that would allow projects meeting clear, pre-established performance standards to move quickly through the process. America is not short of solutions. It's short on permitting velocity. And the blueprint is here. Policymakers now have a unified industry plan to turn what has become a bottleneck into a breakthrough for affordable, reliable, and secure energy for the American people. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Francois. Jim?
Yeah, thank you all for being here today. Many of you heard the presentation, so I'll try to summarize. We are blessed with an abundant resource and in a country and in a world that is concerned about affordable and reliable energy. Natural gas is an absolute dominant solution for our country and for the world. What this study points out is that we have a natural gas delivery system that was largely built for a purpose of ratable service to firm customers, largely on the gas LDC system. There has, over the last couple of decades, been a convergence of the use of that system, not only for direct use of natural gas, but also for electric generation and for LNG export. What the study tried to do was, in a fact-based and a historical and factual basis, try to understand how the system was developed, how it was built, how it was financed, how it is currently being used, and what the challenges are to the reliability, the price, the availability of this resource for all of those purposes, for direct use, for generation, for export. It identified and bucketed a series of challenges that we face, and then came forth with 10 recommendations, narrowed down from about 80. Happy Ken and myself, Toby, can discuss any particular details that are specifics of any of those recommendations. I would also say I think all of us, Francois and Toby and I, we all mentioned the makeup of the study teams was purposefully diverse. It represented different points of view, different regions of the country, different roles in the natural gas and the energy value chains, public sector, NGOs, and so forth. So I think to have the work done, the quality of the work, and to have unanimous approval is not an insignificant accomplishment of the MPC and of the group. So happy to get you the details of who the party participants were. The last thing I'd say, and we do adopt from Francois' report, in our report, a need for permitting reform. And I would say, as we are increasingly concerned about the affordability of everything, including energy, one of probably the single biggest risk and cost to developing new midstream infrastructure is frankly the delays around permitting. And that's a real cost that ultimately gets borne by the average customer, the average family that is dependent on the energy that those infrastructure projects will deliver. And so it is real. It's not a matter of merely kind of convenience and making things simpler and faster. That's important. But really the cost associated with it, I think, is underappreciated until you sit in a boardroom and you advise directors and investors and others of the true cost of the uncertainty that the current system places on the infrastructure. That I think that these both reports make the case that we have an abundant resource, we have growing demand, and we lack the necessary infrastructure to move that resource from source to sink ultimately. Toby.
Yeah, if I could just provide some comments on really the timeliness of these reports. Quite frankly, these reports were needed for over 5 years ago. The stats that Francois mentioned, the gas demand doubling, pipeline infrastructure only growing by half of that amount, and even more striking, the fact that storage infrastructure, which is required to buffer the imbalances between supply and demand, has only grown 2% during that period of time. It's going to lead to massive volatility on these energy systems. And it's something that we've been incredibly concerned about for many years. So we're very fortunate to have this report at this time, better late than never. But you go around this world, and as we're traveling around talking to stakeholders, everybody's talking about AI, everybody's talking about power demand, and everybody's talking about electric prices and energy affordability. And when you're talking about those things, you're talking about natural gas. And when you're talking about power generation, you're talking about natural gas and power generation. So these reports have come at a really important time. I think one thing that's incredibly important that we want to emphasize is just the holistic nature at which this problem was addressed. How can we provide more affordable, reliable, secure energy to Americans? And it's going to take all parts of this value chain. You have all parts represented here at this table. And I'm incredibly encouraged by the amount of collaboration we've gotten from all stakeholders that have a seat at the table and participate in that value chain. And this is a lot of work, and I thank everybody for their efforts. But now the real work in taking these recommendations and translating them into actionable plans is going to be a big focus for us over the next upcoming months.
Okay. Be happy to take questions. Yes, you're right here.
Hey everyone, Ari Natter from Bloomberg News. And let me just say, I have to slip out early for another engagement, so my apologies in advance. My question's for Toby Rice. While you guys were having your meeting, natural gas prices hit $5, level since not seen since 2022. So I'm wondering, how high do you think prices are going to go this winter, and how soon will producers respond? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question because typically what we've seen is price signals have been the call to action. And so we see the price signals. I mean, domestic prices are pushing $5. And it's even more extreme in some other parts of the country. You want to talk about some market signals. The highest natural gas prices in the world are going to be paid this winter, not by Europe, not by Japan. The highest natural gas prices in the world are going to be paid in Boston and New York City. And what's even more remarkable about that stat is that these areas are right next to a region in the United States that are going to pay the lowest price for natural gas in Appalachia. So clearly we see the market signals. It's our ability to respond to those market signals that have prevented us from addressing this issue. And that's why permit reform is absolutely critical. And just to give you some perspective on the political risk that's been introduced into the system and what that's done to prevent projects from getting built, when we want to send more gas to New England, in the past, we've asked pipeline operators to build us a pipeline. And they would quote us, they could build that pipeline and we would pay a fee for around $1 to get a pipeline transport fee. Now, with this political risk that has been showcased over the last 8 years in this country, we're getting quotes of $2 to $3. I mean, so people are having to pay, and that's purely political risk. That's not labor, that's not steel inflation. That is purely the political uncertainty, and that's a result of the billions of dollars that have been destroyed, quite frankly, by an inefficient permitting process, and that's what we're hoping to address here. As far as where prices should be, I mean, in a commodity world, we believe the cost of the commodity should be close to the cost of supply. We believe the marginal cost of supply in the U.S. is probably in that $3 to $4. It's probably closer to $4. That's where prices should be. But without pipeline infrastructure, you're going to see extreme swings and market disconnects like what's happening in Boston. And the lack of storage infrastructure is going to introduce a tremendous amount of volatility. You're looking at natural gas prices being $5 today. They were much lower than that a couple months ago. Okay, we were shutting in 2 BCF a day of natural gas at EQT a couple months ago because prices were so weak. That volatility is showing up through gas storage, the lack of gas storage, and that's another part of the infrastructure that we need to focus and get more infrastructure built there. It's not just pipeline infrastructure.
Do you have any thoughts on how high prices might go?
Well, I think the range that we look at, I think historically you see when prices get to be around $2, you see operators, you see supply starting to shut in, and then, I mean, prices being around $8 is where you see a lot of demand destruction. And we should not be relying on demand destruction to keep natural gas prices below $8. We should be working to develop a system that allows us to put a price on the commodity out there that allows projects to get built, and we think that cost of supply is probably in that $3 to $4 range. But without infrastructure, we're not going to be able to. We're going to see tremendous volatility and market disconnects in the meantime, and prices will swing between 2 and potentially 8. Is sort of our view.
I think it's also interesting, what's the price of the alternative? I mean, importing LNG into New England, fuel oil, propane, I mean, it's a relative discussion. What's the environmental attributes of natural gas at $4, $5 versus the other alternatives, sort of from an all-in position? It's not sort of in a vacuum. It's against what alternatives, and that's the opportunity.
And I would just add, to pile on to the issue, the reason that companies like EQT had gas shut in this summer was somewhat because there's not enough pipeline capacity out of their area, which causes gas-on-gas competition, lowers the price in that local market, and therefore that gas never makes it to storage, which we would be starting to pull out at this kind of pricing level. So I'm telling you, I think people are tired of us, continually saying, but it really does depend on infrastructure. The best thing for our country would be to have too much infrastructure. If we had too much infrastructure, the price would be flat between the areas of production and the areas of market. The poor pipeline companies like us would suffer if we had too much pipeline infrastructure. But truly, if you really were looking out for the consumers and you truly were looking out for the best for our country, you would be getting anybody and everybody, you would be gladly handing them permits to get pipelines built in a responsible manner so that you would actually bring those low-cost supplies like we have in the Marcellus to the consumer. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hi, James Michaelis with Politico. Nice to see you all. I want to ask about permitting reform and the report. We've seen a lot of actions from the Trump administration this year from the executive branch, executive orders and agency actions to try to speed up permitting. But it seems like the report is making recommendations that have to be implemented by Congress. So I'm curious if you all think that the administration needs to be more aggressive in pushing Congress to actually implement these recommendations. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll give that a crack, and then Alex, I'll ask you to supplement. I think, as the Secretary said, abundant supply of energy is what pushes prices down. And the administration, we've challenged ourselves to actually keep up with them with the amount of activity that they've undertaken. And case in point is the very request that the Secretary made of the NPC to deliver permitting reform in 5 months when the prior study took more than a year to undertake. So the administration is looking for our advice on what surgical actions can be taken in the near term, some of which require legislative changes, some of which can be implemented through executive orders, and so hence the 9 of the 10 recommendations that we provided were driven by that request. And Alex, anything you want to add to that?
James, I would just add that some of the big encouragement from Congress is coming from their constituents, right? So we've been hearing about affordability. I know members are hearing that loud and clear. I think the panel has talked about the connection between affordable energy and new infrastructure development and a more efficient permitting system. So that's the sort of loudest, most important voice on Capitol Hill, and I think that you're seeing members of both parties respond to that. But with the Trump administration, they have been providing tremendous leadership, talking about the development of new energy sources, the need for new infrastructure to help with technological advancement. So that, of course, that is helpful as well. But the first voice, if you will, comes from the constituency, and I think members are hearing that loud and clear right now.
A very quick follow-up. Are you concerned that, in terms of the timeline for a permitting reform bill, are you concerned that time could be running short before, the fervor around the midterms really picks up? What do you think there's a deadline of sorts for Congress to pass a permitting reform bill?
I think there's an opportunity for the House to draft legislation before the calendar year is up, and for work with the Senate and potential reconciliation to happen in the first half of the year and well in advance of the midterms. So we're optimistic that certainly the 9 practical recommendations that we made can be implemented in advance of the midterms.
Right here.
Hi, good morning. Ben Gieman with Axios. Toby, you've spoken in the past about the business opportunity that the power demand from data centers provide, and I think this is a topic that's been front of mind, industry-wide. I wanted to ask, given the rise we have seen in electricity prices, do you sense a backlash to the data center build-out, and is that potentially going to create some jeopardy for your business?
Certainly, any big transformative technology in the energy required to power it is going to receive some questions, and I think we're hearing some of those questions now. What is the connection between data centers and electricity prices? One thing I would say, people need to understand, electricity prices, this has been in motion over the last few years. I mean, we Americans in general, across the board, across the country, for all energy types, have seen their energy bills increase over 35% from 2020 to 2024. So let's understand the trends here. But I think one of the key parts of information that we've seen is we actually think data center and electricity demand, the power demand to feed that data center, is actually going to be an opportunity for us to lower prices. And I think when you look at where electricity prices have risen, the states that have been most successful in mitigating the rise in electricity prices, they have one thing in common. They're the states that added more power demand. And this is a point that Secretary Chris Wright has been making. And it makes sense. We have some big data centers that are being located in Pennsylvania, home of the cheapest energy in the world. And these power plants that are going to get built are going to be built to service these data centers, but they're also going to be connected to the grid. And these are large facilities. We're talking, some of these are multiple gigawatts. There's going to be an opportunity for them to divert some of that excess power back into the grid and provide relief. We should be focused on how we can increase the amount of power generation within our grids, and data centers are going to be the keys to make that happen. It's going to be a lot easier for us to upsize existing power plants to supply surplus into the grid than trying to deal with this without the data centers to help.
And I might add to that every opportunity we have to expand our pipeline infrastructure to serve our utility customers gives us an opportunity to actually add deliverability of natural gas for residential, commercial, and industrial uses as well. So anytime you add scale, you add cost efficiency. So as Toby said, there's definitely an opportunity here actually to reduce power prices with expanding the infrastructure.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think a number of these projects are working their way through various state commissions, certainly in our service territory, with an eye towards protections for the other customer classes, the non-data center customers, but that preserving that opportunity to spread more fixed costs over large firm demand. The economics should work, that you can certainly put downward pressure on what rates might otherwise be. I think it's early in that process. A lot of these contracts are going to commissions. A lot of the techniques to protect the incumbent customer classes are being worked out. I mean, we have state regulation. It's a laboratory of democracy, so different states are taking different approaches. But I do think sort of in the maturation of this issue, you will see more of that action at the state level with the design to both protect customers, but then take advantage of this opportunity to spread more of the cost of the electric system over more load and more good load, firm load, right? So I think there's a good opportunity here.
Thank you. Right here.
Thank you. Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
James Rosen with Newsmax. Unless it would be considered an inefficient allocation of energy and resources, I would like to pose 3 questions. with apologies to my colleagues, but I'll try and run through them quickly. First, this report is statutorily presented to the Secretary of Energy, but you've already told us that some of these things can be achieved through legislation, others through executive orders. Quite simply, and I guess this is a question for Chairman Armstrong, is it the view of the council, perhaps not as a formal matter of its submission, but in realistic terms, that the recommendations you put forward will not happen without the direct involvement and attention of President Trump?
Well, I would say, first of all, we put this out at the request of the Secretary of Energy. And we hope that it goes to good use, and we certainly will do our part to make sure that it gets distributed, even though we're not asking for any particular action. We do want for the Congress and we to be informed and understand it. It is shocking sometimes how misinformed our politicians are, and not because they're not
I'm never
smart
shocked
people.
by that.
And it's not because they're not working hard, but it's just that these issues have gotten pretty complex, particularly in places like the Northeast where you have ISOs and RTOs that are not functioning all that well. And so this is a complicated issue. But I would just say that we are very thankful for the administration. Chris Wright has a very clear mission. We're happy to support that in informing him. But I do think that the cost of utility and hitting right home to the pocket, it's very clear to me from my engagement with governors in the Northeast, they very much understand that high cost of utility bills is becoming a political issue that won't care what side of the aisle it's on. They are very focused on getting that done. And I think that is going to bring a political momentum to be seeking out solutions that we've proposed.
Perhaps for question 2, Mr. Zoller and Yagelski could address this most profitably. I wonder if on both the permitting side of things and the gas-electric alignment side of things, you could provide each of you succinctly one example in the real world using real proper nouns of how the absence of the reforms that you're proposing have led to very serious consequences, either for consumers or the economy writ large or our national security itself.
I'll start if that's okay, Ken. Francois mentioned a project that we had that we had developed in the Pacific Northwest. I'll give another example. We have just completed a relatively simple project in Virginia, replacing a 1950s era pipeline with a more modern pipeline, a larger pipeline, to bring new natural gas to southeast Virginia. Local leaders in the community have told us that this is an area that has been growing and is looking to grow, and that businesses have been talking to them about potential business growth. But they've had to turn those opportunities away because of a lack of energy capacity, specifically natural gas capacity. So this project that we successfully prosecuted, we got our permit 6 months early, which was a cause for celebration. But it still took 29 months for a relatively simple replacement project. And so in addition with the example that Francois pointed out, even the successful projects are taking a long, long time. And these projects are solutions to prices, reliability, and the things that communities need. And so the process and delay prolongs the development and the delivery of those solutions.
So on the gas-electric coordination side, I think a great example is some of the activity in the organized electricity markets, where the incentives for the generators are very short-term, essentially for the next year, for the next season. That doesn't give them their own incentive to make commitments to fuel assurance, adequacy, pipeline capacity to fuel their facilities that typically take long-term contracts, 10, 15, 20-year contracts. So that's the market reform recommendation in particular tries to address that, to say, look, there needs to be compensation, appropriate compensation for these generators so they can make commitments to firm pipeline capacity so they have fuel assurance and reliability for the longer term and not just go year to year.
Last question. You've been very generous. I'm old enough to remember the Vice President Cheney's Energy Task Force. Okay, and the criticism that was lodged against that body at that time, I'm sure, would prove fairly similar to whatever criticism exists of NPC and these kind of recommendations. And again, this question is proffered with the reminder that the questioner doesn't actually have to believe any of the content of his question in order to pose it meaningfully for the benefit of all here. But what do you say to the idea that what we have in this council is 200 foxes who've been asked to guard the hen house here, in reading the literature and reading the submission letter, et cetera, it always has maybe 3 key or 4 key words buried in there, tucked in there, while maintaining environmental integrity. Maybe you could address how your report actually sought to advance that goal and why this isn't an example of the foxes being asked to run the hen house.
Yeah, well, first of all, if you look at the makeup of the council and you actually look where people are coming from, you'd be very surprised by the diversity of perspectives. Now, we do expect council member to have experience around the issues, but not necessarily on the money-making side of the issues first. So, and I think that's a powerful part. You heard, if you were in there today, you would have heard an opposition from one of the larger NGOs on the study not mentioning climate, even though that wasn't the topic of that. So believe me, we have a lot of input within the sausage making. There's a lot of input that comes in that would probably surprise you a little bit. But I still think it's a really great question. And I'll just tell you to consider this. The company I'm associated with and the chairman of is the Williams Companies. We're a gas pipeline company. The less pipeline infrastructure that gets built when you're an incumbent, the higher rents you can charge. So I would just tell you, like, that seems very counter for me to be up here pounding the table, trying to tell Americans how critical it is that we get on with permitting reform. But I've seen how chronic it's become and how far behind we've gotten. And it is not going to be long-term. It's not going to be good for our country and therefore not good for our industry and good for a company that's a domestic focused company. So I would just tell you, I think it's reached the point where the money that gets wasted in the permitting process would disgust every American, and the kind of holdups that come through litigation, that 80% of the litigation is won outright by the agencies, but they win in the essence that they hold a project up for 4 or 5 years, and a suboptimal, higher cost solution has to find its way into the market. And so I would just tell you, I come at this, I can speak for myself on this, I come at this truly from a perspective of being an American that cares about our country continuing to be able to use its energy in a constructive fashion. And I think we have a lot of very small, noisy organizations that are standing in our way of being able to utilize our great resources, and I'm up for standing up against that.
Yeah, Alan, I'd like to just jump in here. I think the point you made on the collaboration we have across all stakeholder classes and all technology types, I think one thing that was anchored in this is a focus on making the energy systems we deliver more affordable, more reliable, and cleaner is a part of that story. And look at the track record of some of the foxes that people would say here. There's a track record of the natural gas industry that has transformed this country from being energy dependent to being an energy powerhouse on the world stage. In less than 8 years, we've transformed from exporting zero, having zero surplus, to being the world's largest exporter of natural gas in the country. That's bringing a tremendous amount of security when you create that type of surplus in this country. And let's look at the emissions and cleaning up the carbon footprint. America has been the leader in lowering global emissions. 60% of that has been driven by natural gas. And so, if people want to use the word foxes, I actually think we should be talking about wolves. And I think one of the things that we've been labeled over the past, because everybody up here on this stage has been talking about, if we don't get this issue fixed, there's going to be a crisis. And I will tell you, that's something that we've probably been saying for ever since I've been drilling wells. I've been talking about the issues from a regulatory perspective and how it's going to cause a crisis. And, for years, without a major crisis happening, we have achieved our energy independence. We are achieving energy dominance. People can look at us and say, well, you guys are complaining. This is just the boy who cried wolf, and nothing happens. Well, guess what? The wolf is here. After 8 years of blocking pipeline infrastructure and seeing demand continue to increase, but the infrastructure to support that demand, how much more of that can we tolerate? We're seeing the energy bills for Americans go up unnecessarily, and we're coming here with solutions because we have a track record of delivering affordable, reliable, clean energy systems. I think this is the exact class of people that we need to have at the table with input designing these plans.
Let me add, because it's a terrific question that you asked. And I think that's right, to the extent that, my obligation is to 5 million gas customers, and across the southern system, another 5 million electric customers. And our obligation, as Toby has said well, is to provide clean, safe, affordable, reliable energy. And all of that has to be balanced. It's a four-legged stool, and if I emphasize one of those elements, it's not going to work. And so I do think that for a period of time, and reference was made earlier, that perhaps we got out of balance and thought that there might be a myth of some easy energy transition where we could sort of not have to, maybe we could ignore the physics and the economics of the system, that this energy system that we're blessed in this country, and we're the envy of the rest of the world in having. But I think the Secretary talked about the math, and I always say the laws of physics and economics are undefeated. And I think what these reports do is lay out very clearly the facts of the situation, and then make some recommendations, and whether it's Congress or state regulators or federal regulators will respond to those. But we can't ignore those sort of physical and economic facts, and we have to move forward in a balanced way. And as Toby says, the move, the ability, the domestic abundance of natural gas is largely responsible for the carbon emissions reductions we've seen in this country, certainly in the electric industry, right? Moving from coal to gas has reduced our emissions roughly 40–50%. This is a tremendous opportunity for us, and we've laid out, I think, the factual predicate and solid recommendations, but it has to go forward in a balance. And look, sustainability is an important part of what we do in the gas industry. And I know, Toby, you're net zero in your production in 4 or 5 years and at a very reasonable cost. I mean, it's important. We make long-term investments, right? We want them to be accretive to the communities that we're all so lucky to serve. And so there is, to this extent that we are fox's garden, some hen house, I think that hen house is a lot of our fellow citizens and communities and businesses that we're privileged to have the opportunity to work with.
Back here.
Michael Graham with Inside Sources. You've mentioned several times New England and Boston. I live in the suburbs of Boston. One reason why they don't have access to natural gas, why they were until recently having Russian ships with LNG pouring into Boston, was because of two things: states blocking the pipelines. So question one is, even if you get your reforms at the federal level, what about the states that block them? You just saw, for example, what I guess you would consider good news that Governor Hochul is going to allow a couple of pipeline changes, but that was all at the governor's mansion. The Massachusetts current governor brags about having blocked pipelines in the past. And then secondly, there's the political issue. These people became the governors and the representatives by telling voters, yes, we will block pipelines and you will keep paying higher prices. And the voters in these states approve that. Think about this. New Hampshire, 40% of the people there still burn oil that was driven to their house by a diesel truck, because the political class says, well, we're going to skip natural gas expansion and wait until you have an electric heat pump powered by the offshore windmills. So how does your reform plans address state objections, and then how do you overcome the fact that there are voters who think, I'm fine with higher prices as long as I'm on the right side politically of the energy issue?
Yeah, I would just say, first, and I'll turn it to Francois as well, but first of all, that tide is turning. It was really easy to say that you wanted, that you were willing to make that trade until the higher prices actually showed up. and those higher prices are showing up in these markets, and it is becoming very much a political issue with the governors of New England. And I would tell you from my own perspective, they are very quickly changing their tune and acknowledge the need for having natural gas to back up renewables at a minimum. And I think that's the piece that is missed so many times, is that you can't just have one or the other. You have to have both. And if you have both, it doesn't make it cheaper. It's two forms of capital being invested. And so that's a challenge that, is yet to be reckoned with. But I do think that the political winds are starting to shift quite a bit, including Governor Healy. And I think there's a recognition that they need to do something, because it'll solve itself. This is what I've said for a lot of years. Oh, this will solve itself. You'll kill enough demand and industry and economy in those markets because energy prices are so high. States to the south and east that are anxious to have that, states like Ohio that are anxious to have industry and gas supply in the market, that's where economy and industry is going to go. And I think the governors in some of those states are starting to recognize that, what a deficit they've left themselves by not having access to energy, not just for lower prices for their consumers, which is political, but also having no growth in their economy, because they're not going to be part of data center development if they're the highest cost electric prices in the country. So just flat out, that's not going to happen. So, Francois.
Just to add to that, as an example, our cost of obtaining permits and addressing litigation along the way is higher in many instances than the steel I purchased to build a pipeline. So that there's something wrong when that's the case. But
if the states resist, do
right.
the reforms help you overcome
Yes.
this?
So on that specific question, I'll turn to the example of the scope of the Clean Water Act. The federal government delegates the review to the states. But if we're restricting the state water reviews to actual water quality issues and not bringing in other issues around cumulative effects or things that are already addressed in other statutes in environmental reviews, and we also restrict the litigation timelines and legal remedies that are available. Those two recommendations are intended to stem an overextension of the authorities that are delegated to the states by the federal government. Thank you.
The other thing, I think we're lucky that this isn't as big an issue as affordability and maybe economic development, but is the reliability issue that in the coordination report, I think, is lurking there. The absence of either electricity or pressure on the gas system in the middle of a winter in some of the parts of the country that you're referring to could certainly be tragic, would be tragic. And I would say that the factual predicate in the study would indicate that it's certainly a possibility. And it's one we don't want to, we see it sometimes episodically around weather. Certainly in the southeast, we have storms that come through, and on the utility side, you're engaged in a business that people would like to take you for granted until you're absent. And I would say that reliability is probably an undercurrent in the coordination report and in the permitting reform report that people should pay attention to.
Oh, great question. Yes, sir, Rebecca. You got one right behind there.
Thank you, Tom Tiernan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom Tiernan with the Energy Daily. This is on the gas electric coordination report and Ken's point earlier about power generators' assurance of cost recovery. In the organized markets, that's an ISO rule change level or ISO change. It's not Congress, it's not FERC, it's not states, not an agency. It's ISO market changes. How does the industry overcome that? Because that has been recommended in past reports that Ken mentioned earlier in the presentation.
Good.
So I think it's interesting to note that the gas electric coordination study does not require all congressional action. There's commercial solutions, there's market solutions, and then there are governance solutions, right? So I think that happens, again, if you look at all the recommendations in total, they play off of each other. And if you have clear, transparent accountability for who is responsible for fuel assurance, for the reliability that Jim's talking about. That goes into the long-term planning aspect. And then, that makes it more clear that, hey, the state is responsible for making sure that this reliability exists. And then that in turn can provide the wherewithal for the RTOs and ISOs to potentially change their market structure to account for that. Because again, it's kind of that lack of accountability for, right now, the generators are not necessarily accountable for that reliable service, particularly like an IPP. They're accountable for, bidding into the market and making a profit for their shareholder. And making it more clear on what is the accountability for everybody participating in that market, that they have to perform, that they have to actually have, they need more than just firm transportation capacity on the lateral that serves their plant. They need to have fuel assurance. They need to have firm gas supply that goes back to the production area and the path all the way to the site. And that doesn't happen today, right? And again, so you have to look at more than just the recommendation to do market reform. You have to look at the other 9 recommendations that all have to be done so they build on each other to provide that.
If I can
One more.
I'll follow up if someone else wants to.
Okay, looks like it's yours.
Okay, well, to follow up on that point, if the 9 recommendations are tied together, that doesn't, you're creating a chain that requires more of a heavy lift.
Well, it's a big problem, and that does require a heavy lift. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think maybe.
I guess I'll go back to because Ken mentioned at the beginning another gas electric coordination report. These changes have been suggested in many different forums, many different entities.
But they didn't necessarily include the other 9 recommendations, okay? So again, you have to take them as a whole, that if they're done in conjunction and done properly, they will support each other and be a solution. So you're right. There have been recommendations in the past to say, hey, we should do this market reform, but it didn't provide the necessary support along the rest of the value chain.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say too is I think the factual context is changing, right? You're seeing a convergence towards dual winter peaking on both the gas and electric system because of the expansion of intermittent resources. So you've got sort of more variability, dual peaks, and this forecasted demand growth. And so if organized markets have been able to use sort of retroactive financial penalties if your capacity doesn't show up, I think what we're saying is that's just a bet someone's been taking, and maybe we've gotten away with it so far. But given the contextual change, something's got to be done in advance of that situation to meet the changing demands that the electric system is putting on the historic gas system.
And I do think, it's a great question, frankly, and observation. But we do make one thing that I think, and I can't speak for the other studies that you would reference, but one thing we do that I think was pretty pointed is putting responsibility and asking for accountability of the FERC to oversee the fact that the ISOs and RTOs have to come up with an approach to reliability. Something that people don't understand about this. In a static market with no growth in demand, you don't need to have an incentive for investing in infrastructure 10 years out. And so in a low growth market that existed, you really didn't have to incent that. Well, we've moved past that, and now there is growth in the market, some from electrification, some for data centers, but nevertheless there is growth in these markets. And as a result of that, you have to have a mechanism at the ISO and RTO level to support long-term investment in infrastructure. Today, there is nobody really accountable for that in those states where that's structured. There just literally isn't somebody accountable for that reliability. And that's what needs to change, is a forward-looking perspective on reliability. Thank you, it's a great question. Okay, well, I think that is all that we have for you today. I really want to tell you all thank you for being here. Really appreciate your attention to the matter, and hopefully you can convey the the urgency and how critical it is that we get our infrastructure right here in the U.S. if we want to remain competitive around the world. So thank you all for being here. Francois, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. It's great pleasure to work with you. Happy holidays.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy some time with your family.
Yeah, I'm actually going to Australia to see my son.
Oh, fantastic. I was just there last week. It's lovely this time of year.